Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to continue our discussion about MKUltra. Today's sub-projects are 47 and 60, and it's about the Atlanta and the New Jersey Bordentown Reformatory. So, if you don't like to hear anything about any kind of human experimentation, maybe MKUltra isn't the sub-project or any of the videos you want to hear about, because they're all pretty illegal, immoral, unethical, and just rather gnarly. So if you don't like to hear anything about that, then click off. And if you're sticking around to find out what the alphabet agencies have done, then let's get into it. They were a captive population, drugged with LSD, mescaline, truth serum, and amphetamines. You've heard this before if you've been watching my videos on MKUltra. However, in these sub-projects, the offer for these victims' participation in these experiments was a lessened sentence in exchange for the experimentation. So you have people who are in a prison or in a reformatory situation, and they were given a lighter sentence to engage in experiments of which they didn't understand the depth and breadth of. The doctor in charge here was a Dr. Carl C. Pfeiffer, and I'll leave the name up here. Again, another German named doctor. At what point do you call something a coincidence, and at what point do you stop when almost every single one of them has a German name? He was the chair at the pharmacology department at Emory University, specializing in schizophrenia. And he claimed that they were simply trying to find a cure for mental illness. Again, if you've been watching my videos, you'll know that once these doctors and these alphabet agencies and all the different participants were called onto the floor 20 years later most times, and under oath had to account for their actions, many came up with noble motives. And in this case, Dr. Pfeiffer said he was only trying to cure mental illness. But the Justice Department, on behalf of the CIA, admitted that the program was intended truly to develop an anti-interrogation drug. So, when you think about these two sub-projects, the concept is to use all these drugs, and the goal was to make it so they could find one of them that would help them with their interrogations. Maybe to use for spies. They wanted to find an anti-interrogation drug, and they were determined to do so. The project sought to develop and test new chemical compounds which are hallucinogenic to the human nervous system. The CIA hoped the psychoactive chemicals would work on the victim's mind and emotions to, quote, release him from the restraint of self-control. Dr. Pfeiffer was also located at both the New Jersey Neuropsychiatric Institute and Princeton University, and that was not uncommon and is not uncommon to have doctors have residency in more than one place. So that the fact that they got him, the CIA in this case, got Dr. Pfeiffer on board was a boon, because they had an in to more than one place and more than one set of population to choose from. As we've talked about before, the reason we even know anything about these sub-projects is because of lawsuits, and also because of the congressional record, what they could find, because they found some financial files and then they questioned people. There isn't a long, thick story to be told here because the records were shredded. But there was a lawsuit. At least 4 federal prisoners, they sued as being victims of MKUltra. And an Atlanta attorney, Thomas E. Maddox Jr., represented 4 Atlanta prisoners suing for mental damages they suffered from these drug sessions. The CIA's defense in this case, with these four plaintiffs, their defense was the statute of limitations had run. And we've talked about the statute of limitations in previous videos, just the last one and the one before it. So if you're curious about how that goes down, you can just check these last 2 videos. They go in depth about it. But it's usually a 2-year statute of limitation. Of course, they were blown by 20 years. So you can imagine how hard it would be to fight this when your statute of limitations had run. The Atlanta plaintiffs still accounted horrifying effects. One plaintiff, Russell V. Kirk, he was experimented on in 57 to 58. That's a year. Before the drugging, he was already mentally unstable. He was not a fine-fitted fellow. He claimed that he'd never done drugs before, however, before entering the prison. And after the experiments, he was driven to repeated suicide attempts. Let me just give you an idea of how bad this got. He is in prison when this is going on. This is happening, and this is what he does in prison. First, he slashes his wrists, okay? So then they put him in the hole for slashing his wrists. So then while he's there, he chews a vein in his wrist with his teeth. I've never even heard, this is so feral and animalistic at its basic level. I've never even heard that before. So then they place him in a straitjacket to keep him from killing himself. And after enough time passes and he is released from the straitjacket, then he tries to hang himself. And the record just goes on and on and on with this kind of stuff. And this is what happened to him. This is what happened to him as a result, a causal result of the druggings. Second plaintiff, James T. Knight. He was just a good old Kentucky bootlegger and a moonshiner. So you can picture it, you know what I mean? The MKULTRA experiments left him with memory loss and intense LSD flashbacks. The experiments also turned this good old boy violent against his own family. So once he did end up going home, he was just allegedly off the rails and totally, I wouldn't say a different person, but his personality had changed. Then you have two other plaintiffs we don't even know that much about, one of which suffered permanent brain damage. The other was a fugitive. That's just what it says. So I don't know the depth and scope of their damage, but I do know that they were so jacked up. The two of the plaintiffs were so badly affected that they had to be just transferred to a mental facility. That's their end result as of the time that I did the research. Now here, some people love a good conspiracy theory. Here's a conspiracy fact. Allegedly, I'll say it, Whitey Bulger was also a volunteer victim of the program while in federal custody in the Atlanta prison from 56 to 59. 3 years. Whitey Bulger. Let that sink in. So when you hear about Whitey Bulger's association with MKUltra, you can just focus right in on those two sub-projects. It's actually probably 47 Atlanta. So if you ever want to get deep into it and go past all the other stuff, that's the Whitey Bulger association. But again, the records were shredded, but this is where it came from. A total of almost $350,000 was spent by the CIA on the Atlanta project alone. And you got to think for that time period in the 50s and the 60s, how much money that is today. That's a lot of money. According to Admiral Stansfield Turner, who was at the time this stuff started blowing up, he was the director of the CIA. So that's why I always talk about him. He had to account many times for the failings of his predecessors. Failing sounds kind of passive. For the evils of his predecessors, yeah, it fits a little better. 3 penal institutions, he admitted, were involved in these experiments: Atlanta, New Jersey Bordentown Reformatory, and New Jersey State Prison. So I couldn't even find anything about the New Jersey State Prison, really. In 1962 to 1963, Dr. Pfeiffer received grant money from the CIA. Shocker, right? He obtained 10 schizophrenic subjects per week from Bordentown. The file noted, quote, "A full complement of volunteers from that institution has been freely available and closer to the normal population than the Atlanta prisoners." So see here, Atlanta prisoners are going to be, in theory, in these cases, more hardened, more, Whitey Bulger, you got some rough and tumble fellas. Bordentown, not so much. More probably mental health problems. And they wanted people that were more normal. They wanted your next door neighbor if they could have had them. They didn't, I'm telling you, this is dirty, dirty, dirty. So anyway, long story short, Pfeiffer had a steady source of guinea pigs, and the quote here was, "The source of human volunteers will be 100 reformatory inmates, age 18 to 28, babies, who are stationed on the grounds of the Institute. If 16 volunteers aged 21 to 28 are not obtained from this group," volunteers, snicker, snicker, "for a weekly session of drug testing, we will have 1/8 session of 8 subjects at the Institute and 1 session at the New Jersey State Prison at Trenton. Commissioner Brandberg has given his permission," end quote. Commissioner Brandberg, well, you were in on it too, huh? I never got into who Brandberg was by the time I threw this book under the bed in pure frustration. They obviously wanted a more typical person to do these drug and interrogation techniques. And you might say, well, you know, Thielen, you're not really telling me the whole story. You're telling me they were given drugs. You're telling me about the money. You're telling me about these Germanic sounding doctors and the CIA is doing this stuff. It's because it can't. It's because the records got shredded. The financial records were found, and so they could follow some money trails. And then some lawsuits came forth, and some people could try to piece together to you what happened to them. And you know how with most people, when they've had crazy stuff done to them, they seem kind of crazy. And so it's kind of like you have to have the physical doctor's notes to prove. So you got to understand how bad this was, even for the attorneys trying to sue, because there really wasn't a lot there. But they did find the evidence to a certain extent, but the storytelling of it isn't really present. But what we do know is Dr. Pfeiffer was at Emory University. Then he transferred to the New Jersey Neuropsychiatric Institute. And Dr. Pfeiffer worked with Henry P. David of the New Jersey Mental Health Research and Development Fund, which was the corporation through which the grant had been administered from the CIA. The grant application mentions the subject of Bordentown. And it's got a quote here. "The group may be a better group for this kind of research, since they may be closer to the normal population than the Atlanta prisoners, the latter being recidivists and older than the Bordentown group." So they were looking for people that weren't system hardened, like a more normal person, to do these interrogation techniques. So they were going to give all the drug cocktails that we've talked about so many times in other MKUltra videos, but they were going to add EEGs and all kinds of parasympathetic stimulants to block the conditioned behavior. It's just, I guess, say it again, the Nazi scientist stuff. The human volunteers, some of them were allegedly given time shaved off, and some, I think, I'm not even sure if the Bordentown ones got that, because I don't think it was a matter of time. I think they got a stipend of $350 per week. So in addition to the LSD, the Bordentown subjects were given parasympathetic stimulants to prevent the blocking of conditioned behavior, to stop them from doing their normal conditioned response to a drug stimulant. And they're also given tryptamine compounds. And remember when we were talking about the other videos about how dangerous it can be to change a side chain molecule of a drug when you're really not sure? And what they did was they gave them these drugs and they hooked them up to EEGs, and then they interrogated these folks. And some of them just went crazy. It's sad. It's really, truly, truly sad what was done here. Don't know what good came out of it, if any noble motive was reached. Probably not. People talk about things like waterboarding and a lot of the things that went on at, say, Gitmo. We've been doing this for a long time. We got information from the Nazis, doctors at Nuremberg, and I hope to do another video. I have a whole entire catalog on the Nazis. Everything from soup to nuts, from Germans, their perspective, a lot from the Jewish perspective, a lot from the doctor's perspective, from Speer's perspective, from Army's perspective, everybody, a whole gamut of the German experience. And then the fact that we wanting their knowledge for science and things like that towards the end of, at the end of the war, took as many Nazi scientists and doctors as we could under Operation Paperclip, and that's a real thing. That's a conspiracy fact, not theory. And you just gotta wonder how deep and dark we let that get. Another German name and more crazy experiments. And that's all I can tell you. So, if you hear anything about Whitey Bulger's involvement with MKUltra, this is where it stems from. Wish I could tell you the whole story, but the whole story's been shredded and lost to history. So if you were edified by this video, I would love it if you push the like button and ring that subscribe bell, and you'll simply be notified next time I upload another video. And without further ado, wash your hands and have an excellent day. Thanks. Bye.